Hey everybody, this is Julie. I was working with my Pure Face-to-Face class and I came up with this idea of doing an extended outline and writing a finance paragraph with them, and I thought that I would share with you kind of what I typed up in class. So you get a little bit of a mini lecture here, but you get an example of how you can organize this text together. You have those student sample papers, of course, but now you need to see sort of the pieces and how they work. We've been working on the education section right now. And I'm going to be introducing some of that financial discussion here as well. But think about the essay in its entirety. You know, you have an introductory paragraph where you warm readers up. You say, I'm going into law or I'm going into mechanical engineering. You know, declare that career and major in that first paragraph. And don't let that first paragraph be more than half the page at most. It doesn't need to be particularly long, but you want to orient your reader to the topic. Okay. The education section that we've been working on, we've talked a lot about NOVA. We've talked a lot about this sort of section here that's highlighted. And I wanted to show you how you can mirror and map a section based on some principles of consistency. So for example, if you want to be a lawyer, and this is the one that we worked on in class, and say you were at NOVA first off to get your AA in liberal arts, you could write 2 paragraphs, one about required classes and then one about classes that I think relate to the law. So you have, these are the ones I'm forced to take, and these are the classes that I want to take. So you have the opportunity to personalize this plan to say, this is what really stands out to me, or this is what's unique about the AA. And this is how maybe will prepare me for being a lawyer, right? But to become a lawyer, you can't just have an associate's degree. You have to get a bachelor's degree in the most cases, right? So the next step would be George Mason, and we want to mirror what we did with NOVA. So you'll notice that I have the same pattern of required classes and classes that I think relate to law. And in this example, maybe the student wants to have a history degree, because that really does make sense. I mean, if you want to be a constitutional law scholar, maybe you want to study American history, you know, as your predominant sort of historical specialty. So I've mirrored the 2 types of paragraphs that I've done with NOVA with the 2 types of paragraphs that I've done with George Mason. So I've got some consistency here. But if I stop the paper here, the problem is that is not where you don't bump out at a bachelor's degree and become a lawyer. You have to go to law school. So the next degree is the JD degree. And the next school is George Washington University Law School, just as an example of a school that's pretty local to us. Again, I'm trying to mirror the setup of the prior educational section, right? So required classes and then elective choices that stand out with the type of law I want to practice. And so all of the classes are related to the law. So we had to modify this a little bit, but maybe there are some elective classes like entertainment law that really, environmental law that really stand out to you that may give us a hint about what type of lawyer you want to be. Okay, so that's the first part. And what you have to do within those sections, obviously, is get information from the NOVA website, get information from the history department website at George Mason University, and then get information from George Washington Law School, where they list those classes. So you'll have sources throughout those paragraphs. But visually, I wanted you to see the rest of the paper. So for example, you may have a finances section. Well, of course, you're going to have a finances section. And one paragraph could be tuition. But then one paragraph could be scholarships. You'll find that if you want to be an attorney, it is going to be undeniably expensive. And then maybe you have one about ways, other ways like grants and loans or, you know, what have you. So the finances section isn't structured exactly like education, but within the tuition, I have a tuition paragraph example to show you here. And we can do that sequentially where we start with the first school, then the second school, then the third. But you'll notice the finance section would maybe only have 3 paragraphs and then possibly, you know, a table. The career development section, as you look at some of the student papers, could definitely talk about different job opportunities. You know, you're looking in newspapers, or maybe the American Bar Association has a job postings, or maybe the USA Jobs if you want to go into federal government law work, that kind of thing. And then a day in the life. What does a lawyer generally do? They don't spend most of their time in court for the most cases. So the career development, you know, you could add licensure, bar exam, all different sorts of content that are requirements outside of just the degree, because it's not like you graduate law school and automatically become a lawyer. That's not how it works. You actually have to pass a licensing exam, which is the bar exam. Okay, so the next thing, before I get to the next thing, that's a bit of an extended outline, so you get a sense of, okay, what are all of the pieces? Now, if you don't want to go to law school, you won't have this section. And if you don't want to go to Mason, you won't have that section. Your Nova section would then just expand as necessary, right? So your Nova section may have 4 or 5 paragraphs. Prerequisites, then required, then electives, and then graduation, and maybe job placement, maybe internships, that kind of thing. So it will all depend on your major, and you'll see student samples in the samples folder from, I believe it was week 4 or week 5, where students, Miriam and Virgilio's papers were only at Nova, and then some other students went much further, like Philip's paper. Okay, so I just want you to get a sense of, how do you organize this if you have a bunch of schools? No, I don't want this to be 10 pages, only a couple paragraphs, and condense this to the most interesting tidbits of information. Okay. The next thing you have to do is think about a table, and I just built this one in class, and I even did it without table grids, just to show students what this could look like. So this is part of the finance section now. 2 years at Nova with the AA Liberal Arts degree. It's $187 per credit hour. If you're in state, it's 61 hours of class you have to take at the very least. The total is $11,407 for just tuition. Then we had to calculate 2 more years at Mason to finish that history degree. Okay, Mason says for a bachelor's degree you have to have 120 hours. Well, you've already done 61 at Nova, but please remember you have to do at least 60. You have to do 50% at Mason for most degrees. Talk to your counselors and your advisors. This is a general example, but certain degrees have different rules. So I just wanted to give you a general example here. Mason says that its per credit rate is $302. Okay, so I got that from fall undergraduate tuition rates, and it actually says $377. But let me tell you how I calculated the lower number. If you take 1 credit hour to 11 or 12, it is $377 per credit hour. But do you notice that they have a deal for students? If you take 1 extra class, you go up to 15, it's the same cost. So all I did was do 4530 divided by 15, 5 classes, and that's 302. So you get a little bit of an extra benefit to go a bit more quickly. That's how I came up with the 302. So that was what? 2019 undergraduate tuition. Okay. And of course, you want to make sure you add titles for all of your sources, even in a table like you would in a paragraph. Now, GWU is crazy expensive. I'm going to go back here, and I went to cost of attendance for George Washington Law. Okay, so you can see that they have a page here, and then they give you the tuition credit per credit hour, $22.25. Do you see that by a factor of 10? It's almost 10 times more expensive. It's an extremely expensive school. Now, the amount of credits you take in law school, usually it's 3 years of 30 hours a year, so 90. If you go to George Washington, it's going to be $200,000. So all together, if you add these 3 columns up, that looks to be about $239. But remember, those are 2019 numbers. You may not be going to law school for a few years if you're one of these law students. So here's a way to do 2 things. To create a table and then to create a table and then to write an accompanying paragraph that gives in a little bit more detail. So here's how I did that. And I have some highlights for you to show you sequences. And I'm going to do some additional different highlights here to show you how I named my sources, just like we practiced earlier in the educational section. So for example, I said, I will attend 3 schools to obtain my Juris Doctor degree in law, specializing in constitutional law. So that is a topic sentence that just reminds people of what was covered in education. It's not overkill. It's just a topic sentence to orient readers. Remember, every body paragraph is a standalone document. So when you write it, you want it to stand and work and make sense outside of the rest of the text. And then I said first, so I used an ordinal organizer. First, the cost of my Nova degree, and then the borrowed source is tuition fees. The costs are approximately $11,000 for tuition only. And I said 187 times 61 credit hours. Then I get some analysis or explanation. This does not cover additional costs like books or parking. Second, my classes at Mason fall 2019 undergraduate tuition, and we want to make sure we're consistent with our naming there. My classes are much more expensive at $302 a credit hour, as long as, now I'm just italicizing it to make a point here. I wouldn't italicize it if I were you writing it, that I'm contextualizing the difference between how their table's set up 1 through 12 hours and then taking that extra class. As long as I take 15 hours per term at a total cost of about $19,000. And I actually think I would say maybe $18,000. If we're just rounding, that's what I'm doing in this paragraph. But the true costs are in the table. Finally, so I've done first, second, finally. You could do first, second, third. George Washington University Law School is one of the most expensive law schools in the world. And then we have, this website was called Cost of Attendance. So I had little placeholders. Now I'm naming my sources everywhere I use them. And pretend a table is also like a paragraph. George Washington University Law School is one of the most expensive law schools in the world. Cost of attendance. And that's included in that sentence. The cost per credit hour there is $22.50, and my cost will balloon to over $200,000 for 3 years of study together. Tuition alone will cost me approximately $250,000. This is because I'm basing my research on 2019 costs. And by the time I go to George Washington, the cost will, I wouldn't say probably, I would say most definitely. Those costs are just going to go up. So you can see here that I'm not just restating the numbers. And of course, you could be specific, and you don't have to do approximates in the paragraphs. But the way that I'm doing this is I'm making it a discussion. I'm sharing my understanding of it as I share those numbers. I'm contextualizing it. So that's what the financial section can do. And then, I have little notes about different additional paragraphs you could write in the finance section. So you could say something like this. In my research, there are a few distinct scholarships that apply to my history major. And then this is an illustration paragraph that shows the different research you found about scholarships you could apply for. Then the next one, I have a few ideas on how to pay off $250,000, right? And then you could have a total cost paragraph if you wanted to, right? Where you say room and board, technology fees, interest costs. So you kind of bundle everything. We've really only touched on tuition. We haven't touched on any fees, books, transportation, food plans, if you're going to, live at school, that kind of thing. So you have a lot of flexibility in what interests you and what you want to talk about. My hope is that this research really helps inform the decisions that you make at Nova and beyond, what classes, what appeals to you, where you want to go from here. And the finance is an important part of the puzzle, but there's a lot of flexibility. I just wanted to show you what this will look like as you work on this over the weekend. We'll continue to build. My hope is that the next time I see you, you've got a growing draft, and that you reach out and you ask questions as you go along. Take care.